Welcome to the Goose Fun channel. So, I recently played Marie's Room.
This game is beautiful. As you might know, the original Life is Strange is
One of my favorite games of all time, and thusly I was introduced to Marie's Room due to its similarity to that very game. But I don't want to talk about its similarity to Life is Strange or go do some kind of review, not right now at least.
what we're here for is to talk about themes and feelings and all that shit. So, strap in.
In Marie's Room, we follow a woman by the name of Kelsey as she explores the old room of someone who either was or is her best friend. This information is intentionally obscured to the player at the start of the game, of course. Throughout the events of the game, we uncover not only more information about the eponymous Marie, but also a lot about Kelsey herself and the relationship between the two. Most of the information we get seems to point at them being best friends, but some troubling pieces of intel suggest that something happened between the two that created some kind of rapture between the two of them. Beyond that, we also learn a bit more context to their lives all those years ago, like Marie's father, who'd almost died before she met Kelsey in a robbery gone wrong. As in, they got robbed, not that they were robbing someone. And we learn about Kelsey's delinquent ex-boyfriend, a guy that both girls are incredibly cautious to not anger and be careful around. But we also find out that Marie and Kelsey's friendship went through some kind of turbulence, ending with Marie leaving and Kelsey being left alone. Slowly, we collect mementos of Kelsey's and Marie's growing relationship and place them all back in Marie's diary. And every time we do, we get another little piece of writing from Marie herself, wherein she talks about certain things that happened around the time that it was written. We get insight into her mindset at the time and how she personally thought about the moments we uncovered. We get these cute little remarks about the fact that Marie had been trying to become Kelsey's friend for so long and how she thought she'd blown it when she'd met her at the food bank. Eventually, we collect all the necessary mementos, and we find out why Marie left.
Yay! Good work, Kelsey. Oh my God. The past, like the future, is indefinite and exists only as a spectrum of possibilities. Stephen Hawking said that. I wish it were true. But there was nothing I could do about the past. It was definite as hell. Sometimes I didn't get Marie. I really thought a night by Jones's pool would help her relax. She used to love it there. But she insisted someone had been watching us. And that's when I knew she'd been right. Trevor. Right there in the room. He'd just come in through the open window. He said to Marie, "I told you not to mess with me." But still, I didn't get it. No, it wasn't until he started moving in on her that I realized it was Marie. He was after Marie. He blamed her for everything, and he had a knife. I'd never seen him so angry, so evil. God, I just wanted to punch him with anything I could lay my hands on. My backpack. I smashed it against his wrist, knocking the knife out of his hands. Marie went for it, but Trevor was faster. He kicked her in the head. I dove for the knife, but he jumped me. As we struggled, he hissed, "Didn't I get enough action yet? Maybe I needed another baseball bat to get my kicks." I stopped, because right then I knew what he was up to. He asked Marie about Mr. Torres. Was he all right? Did he still get stomach aches? Marie lay on the floor by the bed, in shock, realizing it had been Trevor who almost killed her father. Then Trevor looked at me, added with a smile. And her. That's when it all went to pieces. Trevor ripped us apart, and he was enjoying it. Marie didn't understand. I tried to explain, apologized, but she wasn't listening. She kept asking me if I'd been there with Trevor, in their house. Trevor stirred things up even more. He told her it was me who had hit her over the head with a baseball bat, that I'd enjoyed it. I screamed in frustration. No, that's not what happened. Tears streamed down Marie's face. She couldn't believe I would do that. Hurt her deliberately. God, I wanted Trevor to stop talking. I attacked him, scratched his face, hit him wherever I could. I hated him. He was twisting everything. I wanted to tell her that I was sorry. Yes, we robbed the house, and we got caught by Mr. Torres. But I never meant for anyone to get hurt. I didn't smash Marie's head. I panicked. I wanted to stop her from seeing me. When I realized how badly injured she was, I called the police. I tried to stay, but Trevor wouldn't let me. He pulled me by my hair into the van. But Marie wasn't listening. I was losing it, and I like to think I beat Trevor up pretty good. But Trevor punched back harder and faster. He was about to crack my skull. Marie clawed for the box beside her, opened it. She screamed, told us to stop, pointed that 9mm at us. Trevor went nuts, charged for her. She screamed, told him to stay back. She'd never shot a gun in her life. She wasn't going to start now. Trevor grabbed her by the shoulders and... What do you think you remember is not necessarily what really happened, or how others remember it. But Trevor fell back on the carpet, dead. That we all remember.
Kelsey had participated. No, to hell with participated. She was one half of that robbery. This obviously causes that rift in Marie and Kelsey's relationship that I mentioned earlier. Marie blames Kelsey for the fact that her dad almost died, which makes sense. And obviously Kelsey blames herself for that as well. Guilt surrounds both of them, embraces them, just like death potentially could have if things went awry. Toru Watanabe is a pretty normal student, studying at Waseda University in Tokyo during the 60s. He's silent, not exactly a loner, he just has boundaries he keeps himself to and he doesn't let people too close. Not that he regularly pushes them away, he just doesn't open up that quickly. Throughout Haruki Murakami's seminal novel Norwegian Wood, Watanabe is the man we follow day in and day out throughout his first year of college. At the beginning of the novel, we get a lot of details about his life there, like his roommate, the stormtrooper, an incredibly meticulous and serious guy with a strange set of interests, or his friend Nagasawa that takes him on double dates and gets him laid all the time. Throughout these segments, we get vistas of his dates with Naoko, a childhood friend of his. They both obviously have feelings for each other, but there's this feeling of impossibility between the two of them despite those feelings. Although he tends to describe his every move in life in detail, there is an element to the novel that comes off as drab throughout this first part. Like there's something missing from his life that not even the stormtrooper, his playboy friend, or Naoko herself can fill correctly. And eventually we find out why. The year before Toru went to university, his best friend Kazuki killed himself. This inciting incident has defined every day of Toru's life that came after, but it's not just the grief that grabs him, it's the guilt. Toru doesn't just miss Kazuki, but the very concept of death has entered his being, and a feeling of guilt has intruded his soul. A guilt for not saving him, sure, but in a sense, a guilt that he feels because he's alive and Kazuki is dead. He is quietly distraught, and his inability to process this grief and guilt threaten to tear him apart. This struggle is exemplified in the characters of Naoko and Midori. Midori represents the freedom of acceptance. Toru has resigned himself to an extent to a life of drab slow motion, as if his life weighed through the waters of loss, as if the weight of death hangs on him like chains, like a lead cloak hanging off his shoulders. And Midori represents cutting himself loose, and instead of letting that death, that grief kill him slowly, seeing it as a sign to live life to its fullest extent as an expression of free will. Toru sees, to a certain extent, the pain and grief of life as inescapable emotions, facts of life that one must wallow in to play the game. Midori sees these same facts, but she'd want him to move through those walls, and to instead focus on all of the life in front of him, as she herself has already resigned herself out of caring for her father's slow death. She's reaching out to Toru and basically telling him to do the same. But in that dichotomy, what does Naoko represent? Sylvia Plath tangentially related to maybe my favorite literary movement of all time, the Beatniks, though the majority of her work came out after this movement had started winding down, is not only one of the best female poets and authors of the 60s, but just one of the best poets and authors, period. And I'll die on this hill. Ariel is an amazing collection, and The Bell Jar is a beautiful novel that I sorely need to reread. Death, and more specifically the mortal guilt and baggage that comes with living, is a recurring theme in Plath's writing. My favorite example of this is Lady Lazarus. In the title already, Plath compares herself to Lazarus of Bethany, immediately evoking images of reincarnation and rebirth, of life, death, and their inextricable connection. Throughout her work, Plath invariably pictures herself as already dead. A dead woman walking, in her words, a sort of walking
miracle. Do I terrify?
Death has invaded her very being like arbuscular mycorrhiza, like a virus inhibiting all her cells and her entire consciousness. Like Toru Watanabe would say it almost a decade later, or as Haruki Murakami would describe in his novel more than 2 decades after that, death was not the opposite of life. It was already here, within my being. It always had been there, and no struggle would permit me to forget that. Plath would later commit suicide in 1963 in a pretty gruesome way that I won't detail here out of respect. Death had consumed Plath early in her life. It had haunted her throughout all of it, and it eventually managed to get its fingers into the deepest parts of her psyche. About 2/3 into the novel, Naoko commits suicide. After a few hundred pages of her being in a mental retreat up in the mountains, of Toru thinking that the grasp death has upon her is losing its hold of her getting better, Toru gets the message that she's passed away. Death consumes Toru once again, makes another reoccurring appearance in his life, and forces him to retreat, to completely disconnect, and to stop living life. Toru embraces the traces of death that had been following him ever since Kazuki, and cuts himself off from the path to life that Midori had been offering him. Naoko reached out to Toru as well, and told him to take that very same path. But Midori allows him to come back. After all the hurt, the pain, it is Midori that really motivates him to return to the land of the living. The prospect, the dream of cutting himself loose from the chains of guilt and grief is what allows him to move on. The realization that he can still make his own choices in life. At the very end of Marie's room, after the traumatic reliving of Mary and Kelsey's falling out, something peculiar happens. Because as we finally read about what happened, about the true history behind their relationship and why they fell apart, one obvious question bears itself true. What is Kelsey doing in Marie's room now, if they had such a bad falling out? If Kelsey's direct actions that almost led to the death of Marie's father and led to Marie herself murdering a man, why would Marie ever let her back in? And maybe they just grew older. Or maybe with death's grasp so tight on them for so long, it eventually had to let go. A grip held tight for so long eventually fatigues, is forced to let go at risk of hurting itself. Marie had to let go of that grudge at some point, let go of the anger at risk of living forever in that hatred. And Kelsey had to accept the guilt, had to let that close brush with death enter her and live past it. Marie and Kelsey both had to follow Midori. Their close encounters with death had changed them. But that didn't mean they had to let it change them any further. So, if you made it all the way to the end of this video, yeah, thanks. This is one of my more out there video ideas, but it's also one I've been the most invested in. Both Murakami and Plath are some of my favorite authors of all time, and Marie's Room is one of my favorite indie games I've experienced in the past few years. I just love talking about art that I love, and this allows me to talk about 3 different pieces of art that I love in a really cool thematic way. Before I end the video, there are a few addendums I want to make. Firstly, in the Sylvia Plath section, I really did not mention Ted Hughes and the effect that her marriage to him had on her life and mental state. And, you know, their marriage had a pretty huge effect on her. In a lot of ways, Hughes is the reason she ended up committing suicide, in my opinion. But outside of the fact that this makes the narrative of the video kind of muddy, I think analyzing Sylvia herself is just much more interesting. Who cares about Ted Hughes? Secondly, there's a lot more art about death and the haunting pain of grief that I would have loved to talk about in this video. Just off the top of my head, Mount Eerie, the Max Payne franchise, other Murakami novels and short stories. And you might have also noticed that the music I used in the background of this video has been from a variety of albums and projects that all allude to the subject in some way. And finally, I don't know if I would have made this video the same way I made it if I redid it right now. I've had the script in a half-finished state for over a year now, and I'm happy it's finally coming to a head. But I'm not sure I still agree with my core thesis of what Marie's room is really about. I think there's parts that still make sense to me, but in the end, I think it's kind of strange to put it as such an important part of this whole thesis. If I had to do it again, I'd probably replace Marie's room with a game I mentioned at the start of this video. Life is strange. But that's a story for another video. And with all these addendum DDoS out of the way, I think it's time for me to wrap up. I hope you have a good day. If you like this video, please check out my Patreon, all that bullshit, and I'll see you all in the next video.